I'm Alexis Schwerha with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. Today I'm joined by Aidan Shank, a junior at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee who is studying architecture. Aidan was recently a part of a panel about free speech and hate speech, where he had the opportunity to provide some pretty interesting insight. Here to break down the topic for us and talk more about the event is Aidan himself. Aidan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this because I think it's a super important topic for conservatives on campuses all across America. The whole concept of free speech and hate speech, we as conservatives care a lot about free speech. And some people that I'm close to were kind of worried that going into this panel that I participated in would kind of be like walking into a trap because of the false premise of just hate speech existing. And a big topic was how to handle hate speech. And that was a big challenge, but it was a conversation that I think all conservatives should be a part of, just because, if we're practicing what we're preaching and we're saying that free speech is important because of the idea of this marketplace of ideas and all the reasons that we should be presenting our beliefs on campus, then that also means coming to where the opposition is, being a part of these conversations that they're having, and really making sure that we're heard in these conversations.
Absolutely. So kind of break down this event for us. Walk us through what was going on. Was this a more bipartisan effort to talk about the First Amendment?
Well, it was put on by the University of Wisconsin's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So bipartisan, not really. It wasn't co-hosted by any conservative organizations, or in that case, in the same sense, any openly democratic organizations on campus. But because of the false premise of hate speech, it was somewhat biased in that way. And I was the only panel member out of the 4 of us that had a more absolutist idea of what free speech is. So the panel being balanced somewhat because everybody on the panel was going into the conversation out of respect and wanted to just have the discussion that we did end up having, which was productive. But there wasn't an equal balance or any effort to make it more partisan than it was.
All right, so going into this event, you had an opportunity to kind of express your thoughts, to your peers. What was one message that you wanted people to take away?
Well, the topics really kind of revolved around our own experiences. And that was difficult because there was a lot of diversity on the panel and a lot of people sharing their own experiences with racism or different kinds of like actual hate on campus, which hate does exist. And the biggest message that I wanted to kind of communicate was that even though the hate that they experience is difficult on themselves and on people who might also be impacted by similar hateful messaging, it's important that we allow for that because it opens up the conversation and it allows them to really directly address the hate that exists in the world, because hate will always exist. And either it's going to be kind of in the background and it's going to be just feelings that these people have and are seen in other ways, or they're going to be, spoken, and that's going to be hurtful, but it allows us to really, address it and make sure that we have an opportunity to fight back against things that everybody can agree on are hateful.
Absolutely. And so, I'm really curious because here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we don't always hear these stories of conservative students like yourself standing up and firmly expressing their beliefs with such conviction. So what inspired you to want to speak out on this issue?
Free speech is something that I feel very passionate about. And again, it's something that the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee has somewhat of a history with. We eradicated all of the bad policies that were blatant infringements on First Amendment rights, especially at a public university. Like, we have to abide by constitutional rights that our students are protected. So I know that there's a big push now too, after different demonstrations and different protests that some students found great offense to. And in the past at UW-Milwaukee, there's been even more that, neo-Nazis, real neo-Nazis with swastikas on campus, a lot of different instances of real hateful messaging. But again, we need to allow for that so that we can directly address it.
Right. And, you were in a unique opportunity here where you were able to present the conservative argument and stand up and defend free speech. So did you see you have any success? Did anyone's minds get changed?
I think definitely. After the panel, after the discussion, a few people came up to me and said that they were presented with different ideas that they weren't already presented with. And again, with the marketplace of ideas, it's a shame that they weren't already, but I was extremely grateful for the opportunity to make sure that they at least know a little bit more about why conservatives feel so strongly about free speech and why we know it is an important right that we have. So I was impressed by the openness of people who attended as well. People who I know went into it, didn't really have much sympathy for people who stood so firmly for free speech, but definitely came out of it with maybe a little bit more openness. You can't change minds in 2 hours, but are definitely thinking more critically about, why we have this right in America.
And then just to wrap us up here, what do you think universities need to do more of in order to protect and defend free speech for their students?
I think just talk about it first. Make sure that students aren't asking for something that they shouldn't want. And again, that leads right back into the marketplace of ideas and making sure that they're exposed to different sides of the argument and know that our rights that were outlined, our God-given rights in the Constitution that were outlined by our founders, are still very relevant today and were written in our Constitution for a reason. And I think doing that will definitely sway the conversation in a lot of ways, but also just making sure holding universities accountable. Campus Reform does a great job of exposing when the public universities and private universities do a lot to limit freedom of speech and other rights that students have on campus, and combating the bias when we see it, speaking up, not kind of just letting it happen and accepting the fact that campuses are liberal, but actually doing something to make sure that students have an opportunity to think more critically about these things.
It's definitely important, and it's just a topic we cover a lot here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform. We love free speech. We love hearing students advocating for free speech. So Aidan, thank you so much for joining me today and breaking down this issue.
Thank you for having me.